Hey you guys, this is Miss Carr. This video is going to be about big data. That would have been something that we would have covered in Unit 5 during 4th 9 weeks. Now let's review just a second. Now we talked about data back in Unit 2. And if you remember, we said that data is anything that can be observed and recorded. Some examples of data are a person's height, how long a phone call lasted, or your location at different times of the day. And those are just a few examples. Remember, data can be almost anything if we can observe and record it. But this is just what data is. What do you think is meant by the term big data? Take a moment and I want you to pause the video and jot down what you think is meant by big data. So, what is big data? The main reason we collect data in the first place is to be able to analyze it in order to make decisions or to see what we can learn about different situations. So, in general, the term big data refers to sets of data that are so large that it's difficult for humans to analyze them without the help of a computer. In other words, we can't learn much from the data without a computer helping us to process it. Okay, so let's look at an example of big data. Now, this is just a spreadsheet of data that I had downloaded from off the internet. But and this is from Metro Bike Share. It's a company in Los Angeles where they kind of rent out bikes and people will share the bikes and ride them across different parts of the city. But they'll borrow the bike and they'll return it at a particular location. But they've got different information here. If we go across the top row, we see the different categories of data that are collected. So they have a trip ID for each time somebody borrows a bike. They have the duration. How long of a trip was it? How long did it last? You have the start time, end time. You have a start station, so that would be kind of the particular location where they picked up the bike. And you have a starting latitude and longitude. And you can see down here that they have the coordinates of that location. Then you have the end station, the place where they return the bike, along with the coordinates as well, the ending latitude and longitude. And then they have an ID for which bike they used. I'm not sure what this column refers to, but then they have a trip route category. So was it just a one-way trip, or was it a round trip where they went to their location and they returned back to the starting location? They have information about their customers. What type of membership pass do they have? You see some people were walk-up customers. Some people have a monthly pass. Some people have an annual pass. Okay. But it tells information about that. And then the last column over here, it tells about the type of bike. And so different options they had there. There were standard bikes. They have smart bikes. There's electric bikes. Okay. Now, if I scroll through this list of data, you can see it's just kind of row after row after row of information. Now, if I go all the way to the bottom, if I get all the way to the bottom finally, you see that there are 64,546 rows of data. That's a lot of data for a person to try to process and figure out things just on their own by looking at it. Okay. So another example of big data that we have that's relevant right now is the U.S. Census. And so you guys have probably talked about the census in probably a social studies class at some point through the years. But the census counts every person living in the United States. And the census is conducted every 10 years. And right now, the 2020 census is currently ongoing. Your parents have probably gotten some information in the mail about how to submit the data for your household as part of the census. What is the census used for? So one of the things it's used for is to determine the amount of money that the government provides to fund schools, hospitals, and emergency services such as law enforcement or fire departments. It's also used by state and local governments and businesses to make decisions that affect their communities, such as housing decisions, where they might put businesses, or what are certain services they should provide in certain areas. The one thing that we're most familiar with census data being used for is that it's also used to determine the number of representatives our state will have in the U.S. House of Representatives. So let's look at some data from the Census Bureau. So the good thing about looking at some of this data on the Census Bureau, like when they have the data, it probably looks something similar to what is here on this Metro Bike thing, where it's just like a list of data. But the good thing about looking at the data on the Census Bureau site is that they've already done some analyzing of the data for us, and they've put it in forms that are a little bit easier for us to understand. Okay. So one thing they do is they give you a map. And so let's look at Mississippi, because that's where we live. We want to know about Mississippi. So here at the top, we can see some data here about Mississippi. The population of Mississippi is almost 3 million people. And you see some other statistics over here. But if we scroll through this list of information, you can see that they've done different things to make it easy for us to understand the data. So we have bar graphs. And so on this particular one, it's easy for us to see that the majority of the population in Mississippi is 18 years or older. And we've got some color-coded maps, if this one will load. And so this particular one is about people in Mississippi who were born outside the United States. And so you can see the little color-coded key down here at the bottom. The darker the color, the more people that lived there that were born outside the United States. So you can kind of see that. The lighter the color, the fewer people born outside the United States. Okay. But those color-coded maps help us to kind of understand what that data is showing us. And then another way that they do our data is to show a line graph. And so this one is especially good for showing increases and decreases over time. And you see it is broken down over multiple years. But this is the number of people that are uninsured in Mississippi. And you see that has been decreasing, becoming less and less. But all of those different ways all these picture representations of the data make it easier for us to understand what that data is telling us than if we were just looking at the list of data like that spreadsheet over here. Okay? So, for the next lesson, on the next lesson, we will talk about ways to collect data and how to make sure that we get accurate data. So before you start the next lesson, you have an activity to complete. All right, so in your package, you will have multiple pages called the happiness data collection. Now, you're going to need some other people to help you with this activity. You're going to have a total of 3 different sheets. Now, you can fill out one sheet yourself and get 2 other people to help you fill it out, okay? So let's look at the instructions real quick. It says, during the 3 days, so you have to do this for 3 days, you will generate a collection of data about different tasks you did during the day and how you were feeling at the time. Ideally, you will carry this paper with you and take notes throughout the day. You should have at least 5 entries per day. So if you do 5 entries per day for 3 days, you should have at least a total of 15 entries total, but you can have more. For the columns day, time, and task, you should record the data in whatever way you think is most appropriate. For the last column labeled happy, record some measure of your happiness that you felt while completing this activity. How you record this data is up to you, okay? So these different tasks that you may be doing, it may be a chore around the house. It could be watching TV or playing a video game or talking on the phone with your friends, looking at social media, whatever task you end up doing throughout the day, just kind of record it down and tell how happy you were, okay? Now, when you get the other people to help you with this project, don't discuss it with them too much. Just ask them to read the instructions and fill in at least 5 entries per day for 3 days. And when they are finished, ask them to return the data collection sheets to you. Then you'll be ready to come back and watch the next video, how to write good survey questions. All right, so I'll see you guys on the next video.